All right, so I'm going to do something a bit different for this MOvember video. I'm going to just share this screen and record and present on the cycles of addiction and recovery. And this is a presentation I did up at, where was it? The Gold Coast for the Addictions Conference. And it's the work of Patrick Carnes. And I'll see if I can just shrink this down a little, make that a little bigger for you guys. So let me, I'm going to try and do a brief version of this. It is November day 20, but I'm a video behind. So the mustache is coming along. Let's get into this. So if you're suffering from any addiction or know anyone that's suffering from an addiction, this is what we're going to look at today. So I'm going to quickly define addiction. I'm going to quickly talk about how to assess for it, the cycle of addiction and cycle of recovery, how to transform from one cycle to the other, some quick tips on relapse prevention, and how this sort of really works and fits into this theme that Gabor Mate and that are championing, which is, you know, addiction is about isolation and recovery is about connection, and all addictions are about how we are medicating ourselves away from ourselves, that, you know, that disconnection. So lots of people that come into treatment have that question of, am I an addict, or as I like to put it sometimes, am I an asshole? Look, and the thing that I'll do is just put it up on the board and say, look, most people use things to make life a little easier. They grab an ice cream on the way home from work. They might put $10 through the pokies occasionally. They might have a flutter in the Melbourne Cup. They might have a drink on Anzac Day to honour the veterans, you know. So lots of people use most things that we use to distress tolerate at a moderate level. It doesn't hit the radar. Then there's people that might have an abuse issue with it, and so that can largely be something that it can be a process or an addictive behaviour, but they just do it, they're overdoing it. And these are the folks that reach out for a bit of help. Modify it might be someone who's overusing alcohol, goes to the GP, goes on an alcohol plan, a drinking, sort of healthy drinking plan, a harm minimization, and they rectify the problem. And then there's people that have an addiction or a disorder, depending on, you know, what model you're looking at. And even like now with sex addiction, we've got a disorder diagnosis that we can draw upon. So the definition of addiction, which always worked for me and helped me, and I understand it this way now, that addiction is a primary chronic disease of the brain's reward, motivation, memory, and related circuitry. That dysfunction in these circuits leads to a characteristic biological, psychological, social, and spiritual manifestations. And this is reflected in an individual pathologically pursuing reward and or relief by substance use or other behaviors. So what's been important about this for me is, you know, since they've been able to MRI the living brain, we can see this in action. Dr. Valerie Voon put porn addicts that met the criteria of addiction inside an MRI, showed them porn, no masturbation, and no like physical touch, and yet their results were significant and measured up against people that had taken a line of cocaine. So, and were significantly different from people that had seen erotic literature, but weren't addicted to it, didn't meet that criteria of addiction, so they didn't have this chronic disease of the brain. So what is the criteria of addiction? In its simplest form, compulsive use. If the alcohol or drug or behavior is available, then the addict, well, there's an up-to-date on YouTube there, that the addict will use too much of it and use it too often. So it's compulsive. Impaired control, when an addict tries to use, control is lost, and usually a single use is followed by many more. As is often heard in Narcotics Anonymous, 1 is too many, 1,000 never enough. Continued use in spite of consequence. So addicts keep using drugs, alcohol, you know, unprocessed addictions, even when it starts to cause health, relationship, job, or legal problems. The phenomenon of craving, the desire for alcohol, gambling, sex, or a drug can change in intensity from minute to minute. It can even disappear during abstinent periods. But even using or doing a tiny amount of the behavior or chemical will trigger continued use, and people, places, and things associated with it in the past can wake up these cravings. And the last piece is denial. There is a saying that addiction is the only disease that tells you that you don't have it. The degree that an addict can minimize use and its consequences is one of the most striking and common manifestations of addiction, as well as the most baffling to others. And that's a quote of Dr. Patrick Carnes. Sometimes when people come in and they're in that pre-contemplative stage of change, they're only there because someone else has put them there. I usually ask them who's in that sort of chorus of the baffled, who wants them there more than them. Now, breaking through this denial is an important component. I'd say probably the most important component of addiction treatment. So the making of an addict, also people ask that question, look, why am I doing this? Where's it come from? And there's a note in the middle here from Carnes that this model can be a flow chart of factors that compound addiction potential, or any one problem area could be a catalyst for the manifestations of addictive behaviors. So, early childhood stresses, living in fear or chaos, leaves children living in that crisis mode, sexual, physical, or emotional abuse, or neglect. Early losses or catastrophes can predispose the brain for addiction. Early exposure, teen drinking, teen smoking, teen drug use, teen internet use, gambling, sexual, physical, or emotional abuse or neglect, or the culture someone grows up in can be a catalyst. Adult traumas, war, natural disaster, divorce of a partner, loss of a job, victim of violent crime, loss of a child, chronic illness or disability. Genetics, fewer dopamine receptors, novelty gene, family members with addictions. Learning and modeling, growing up in a family which adults had excessive behavior, and modeling confirms that this is how to do life and handle feelings. And early attachment, failure to bond with parents or primary caregivers during the first 2 years of life, inability to establish attachment. So this could be a flow chart, it could be any part of this, and part of therapy, once we've identified we've got an addiction, is to just delve in here and explore and get curious about it. Like we can have denial about addiction, we can have denial about our abuse and trauma. It's a coping mechanism. So what is real? Breaking delusion. What we're trying to do here in early recovery is break through that early sort of veil that says it's not really a problem. So we're looking that addiction is an illness of escape. Its goal is to obliterate, medicate, or ignore reality. It's an alternative to feeling hurt, betrayed, worry, or, as Khan sort of says, loneliness, the most painful feeling of all, that fear of abandonment. It cripples our ability to know what is real, and it weaves a string of rationalizations and delusions that makes it impossible to cope with details like jobs and families. Addicts are not doing it to get off anymore, they're doing it to escape. So isolation to regulation, what is the goals of early treatment and therapy or interventions of any kind, even 12-step fellowships, is to create safety and to be present. So we want to come out of this looping, ritualized behavior and create safety. Treating addiction is treating trauma. So look at like that making of an addict, to get down to look at what is underneath and driving this. To really early in recovery, we've got to add mindfulness and meditation, exercise, nutrition, and sleep are the stool that all addicts sit on to get well. That the brain needs these things for it to grow the new neural pathways and break the old habits. Learning grounding techniques, because guess what? That's what addiction was. It was a way to medicate reality. So learning ways to ground us and get us back into our body. Learning, what if you've come from developmental trauma, you'll have an inner and outer critic that once we stop medicating ourselves, they become a loud voice and very destructive, and usually leads us back to acting out because of the rage and depression and pain that they create, and the shame that they create. So getting a sense of those, and as Bob Earl and even Bob Darrell out of AA, when they share and their talks are on YouTube, they talk about they didn't think about killing themselves until they got sober. So this is that idea that we're going to have these big shame voices talking, and we need to take care of those, and to really soothe the body in different ways. Massage, yoga, TRE, exercises are ways that we can start to release stress from the body. Because as we take away our medication, whether it be processed or chemical, we're going to be left with that stress. So What we need to do in recovery is understand the addictive cycle. And most folks, and you'll see on there about the, that they'll understand what a bottom line behavior is, and they know that they got to stop acting out, but they really don't know. And we can be in quite dull to the fact and deluded about how we get there. So what Carnes put out is that all addictions start with a cycle within a system. So the system is the core beliefs, these negative core beliefs, either about the addiction itself or our early life. I'm unlovable. I'm unworthy. Life's not going to work out for me. Beliefs around the addiction. Everyone does it, and I can't help it. Will then lead on to this impaired thinking. But largely, I'd say that for me, it was looking for, what are those I am beliefs? I'm worthless, I'm unsafe, I'm bad and flawed, I'm too needy, I'm broken. What are those core beliefs that we're running from? That leads to impaired thinking. And the impaired thinking is the permissive thinking that puts us into the addictive cycle, from the system into the cycle. And this thinking is progressive. It's on a continuum. It might start with, oh, there's nothing wrong with it, everyone does it. But as you really fall into addiction and get lots of consequences, it might be, I'm an addict and no one understands, or I was abused as a child and I can't stop. But we need to locate what's the impaired thinking that lets me go into the addictive cycle, which is what I'm going to describe next. So once we have the impaired thinking, it lets us go into preoccupation, which is largely made up of fantasy, objectification, and euphoric recall. And this is why the definition of addiction being a brain disorder of reward, memory, and motivation is important, because that's what gets activated. Even if you're a heroin addict hanging out, if you're on the way to get on, you've finally got the money, you've rorted your way to get that hit, your brain chemistry is changing, the dopamine's flooding, the adrenaline's flooding, you're a chemical concoction waiting. Yes, add heroin, that's going to take that pain away, but if you were to measure their brain activity at this point, just in preoccupation, it's important. This is particularly important for sex addicts and process addicts that, it's like folks that want to give up gambling, but they play Hold'em poker for no money down on some app, and they find that the brain starts to charge up and it primes them to act out. Now, when we're in this cycle, preoccupation will lead us to rituals. And we need to, if we're going to get well from addiction, understand the rituals we go into around people, places, and things. Now, I call this impaired thinking, preoccupation, and rituals as the Bermuda Triangle. In this area in recovery, if we maintain secrets here, we're in trouble. Because largely, most folks think they can stop the behavior between rituals and acting out. They play in this area. But largely, core beliefs lead to impaired thinking, lead to preoccupation. It's triggering the brain's reward and memory. We move on to rituals, and then we move to acting out. Now, once we act out, we're going to go into a shame and guilt spiral, especially if this addiction's progressed. Now, shame and guilt means we feel bad, and the brain knows how to feel good. So between shame and guilt and preoccupation, we can get stuck in this cycle. This could be the sex addict that goes out to sex on premises, acts out, feels awful, comes home. By the time they get home, they're going to watch more pornography to get over what's just happened. So this cycle can loop around, but it will create unmanageability or problems. And problems confirm the core beliefs. Told you, see, I'm unlovable. So core beliefs, impaired thinking, preoccupation, rituals leading to acting out. We feel bad, can get stuck there for a while, and we will accumulate this unmanageability that confirms those core beliefs. Anyone that's been in addiction knows you can be stuck there for a long time. Very painful. What Carnes is presenting is addiction isn't just about stopping something. It's about transforming it, starting, to invest in something other than the old behavior. So we need to stop the old behavior, and to do that, we really need to understand it, and then it's what we stop it with. So he's proposing that we need to change the core beliefs to new beliefs about ourselves. And this is where you'll see all the research is backing this up, that affirmations and validations and gratitudes, when people in recovery really work on those, even if they don't believe them in the beginning, but they're investing in creating them and practicing them with each other. You'll see in 12-step culture where people send their gratitude list out to a whole bunch of people, and they send their gratitudes out. and it starts to fill that brain with a more positive way to look at self. The empowered thinking is an extension of that, because instead of having that impaired thinking, everyone does it, like in NA, a thousand's, once too many, a thousand's never enough. Think, let go, let God. We need to start to invest in these new slogans. Carnes puts out in Facing Addiction and Facing the Shadow on Sex Addiction about we need to, at this point, subscribe to provisional beliefs, a paradigm shifting belief system that we mightn't be able to manufacture ourselves, but we can subscribe to an external belief system. And he draws that from Stephen Covey's work with highly effective people. Empowered thinking puts us into that focus. He talks about the zone, and instead of having a distressed brain that's now got impacted with reward, memory, and motivational circuitry, what we're trying to do here is regulate our state. So this empowered thinking and these focusing behaviors that put us into this recovery ritual now. So our rituals have changed. People, places, and things go from the dealer's house or a sex on premises or a laptop with pornography into a laptop that's got a Kindle on it with all our recovery literature, or a 12-step meeting hall, or a therapy group, or we have now putting ourselves in a different place, and that puts us into this recovery zone when we participate in good health, good sleep hygiene, good exercise, good, as they say in Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, outer circle behaviors. What that leads to is instead of depletion is resilience. And this resilience gets us craving it more. So we can cycle around in this focusing zone that regulates us, and then the end result of that is this reward. So the task of recovery is to go from one to the other. And so what we've got here is we need to transform. So this addictive system has to help us identify the obstacles we need to overcome, and then to transform towards the recovery system, what steps are we practically going to take? Now, in 12-step culture, they've got some fantastic steps. In other modalities, I've been doing some stuff on videos. I'll try and get a good view of this, but this book, Pure Desire, is a Christian program, and it's also references the Conquer series around creating groups that give us accountability and support. But the idea here is that we are trying to move, there you go, trying to move that out of the way for you folks. We're trying to transform this system. So it's addiction recovery is not about just stopping something. We really need to invest in what do we need to overcome in that whole system, and how do we take very practical steps. And working through this with a therapist or a sponsor, especially a CSAT, certified sex addiction, or a certified addiction therapist, can really help us drill down and deal with this. So one of the ways that we identify, from doing our addictive cycle, is we get to identify here the 3-circle approach that you'll see in a lot of 12-step meetings. This is the model of Sex Addicts Anonymous, but every modality has their version of it. A book here by Alexandra Katahaka, she's got her version of that in here that she talks about around the 3 circles, and she's got a different take on this with calling it the integrity zone, activation zone, and sobriety zone. Patrick Carnes writes his own version of that. So this model you're going to see. But the inner circle really is identifying what are the bottom lines. This is a sex addiction tool, so compulsive sexual behaviors in which we choose to abstain from. Middle circle behaviors, which are much less destructive and weaker in intensity, but they cause us that much less of a problem, but they tend to lead us back to that inner circle. So we really got to, that's why I like Alexandra Katahakis' phrase that activation, it activates us back towards addiction, or can activate us towards recovery in the outer circle, which is things we do to enhance our lives and our recovery that keep us engaged with others and with reality rather than isolated and in fantasy. One of the things I like about Ted Roberts, Carnes talks about this too, that we can't do this alone. If this really is about from isolation to connection, it involves others, and addicts are largely isolators. Even in a crowded room, we're isolators. So this idea that the outer circle needs to lead us towards connection. And that connection can be in 12-step meetings, therapy groups, but we can't do this thing alone. So remember, your circles would change as you learn more about your behaviors during your recovery. So they're usually quite strict and stringent in the beginning, and we will add and subtract things as we go along. So remember that recovery is about this sort of regulation, this isolation, and that regulation leads to connection. It's not going to be easy because we've usually hidden away from this, and underneath that, in that making of an addict for a lot of us, is a real attachment injuries that will need to be addressed as we go along in recovery, but we can't get to it till we get to recovery. So getting that community around us is essential and important. So how might we do that? And this is just one little, and I'll try and move this over the other side here. This is one little snapshot of what a day might look like. And in early recovery, it looks like a lot, but believe me, when you're putting all that effort into addiction and you stop, you've got time. So morning rituals might include things like a personal statement of intention or a prayer if you're a spiritual or Christian person. Meditation, no use talking to God if you're not going to stop and listen. Reading some encouraging literature, doing outreach calls, maybe an early 12-step meeting. AA and a lot of fellowships have early morning meetings, and some sort of cardio exercise to get the heart moving and pumping, all the benefits that light exercise brings. Throughout the day, ongoing affirmations and gratitudes, listening to talking books, outreach calls to others, box breathing and diaphragmatic breathing to relax ourselves, ongoing mindfulness, or a 12-step meeting at lunch. Lots of people go to lunchtime meetings in central business districts and eat their lunch there if they're 12-steppers. An evening ritual might include a gratitude list, a prayer for the end of the day, journaling and dumping out whatever that negative or ritualized or over-focusing that we're doing, and also just to sort of journal and to have a deeper relationship with self, growing our awareness of self. More meditation, maybe some ambient music, yoga and stretching. And, it's all built around good nutrition, ongoing healthy exercise, and good sleep hygiene, including mindfulness and meditation. So it's just learning. Part of that system transformers, these are certain things that actually bring that, transform that system from addiction to recovery. Now, relapse prevention will mean ongoing one-on-one therapy, group therapy, between, some group therapy between some sort of group support, 12-step meetings. And when 12-step meetings is a culture, you're joining a fellowship, you're not attending a meeting. So, if you're a 12-stepper, it's that second half of meetings where we get to know people, go out for a cup of tea or coffee, do some, I remember in early recovery, we'd go bowling on Friday night because we were avoiding going out to old stomping grounds like pubs and clubs. So we had an indoor cricket team for a while there, doing stuff that's outside of meetings with people that go to meetings. Getting a sponsor. Outreach calls, and there's a phrase, Coxie, if you're listening to this, make a call or take a call. If you're gonna give your number out, you answer that phone when someone rings, and if you can't get back to them, let them know I'm busy, but are you okay? And they're positive behaviors that are going to lead to connection. And then the other part of relapse prevention I'm a big fan of is doing things that really treat that midbrain injury if you've got developmental trauma, and ongoing regulation treatment. Brain spotting is something I've put down as an example there. And to be honest, Dr. Robbie Abels, an Australian woman, has invented a crocodile setup that really helps addicts use the brain spotting technique to lower the and remove the craving that happens by linking the craving and like in that cycle of addiction, linking the negative consequences to the addiction to the craving and short-circuiting the whole thing from happening. So certainly look up Dr. Robbie Abels and brain spotting. Couple of resources there. This material I've taken from Dr. Patrick Carnes and Stephanie Carnes and John Baily put together a great book on addiction called Facing Addiction. I just put Russell's Brand's Recovery Freedom from Our Addictions book there because it is, I think, the best modern book on the 12 steps. If you're a Christian, you might want to look at Breathing Underwater by Richard Rohr, the big book itself by Bill Wilson. But Russell's book is a really good modern day take that has a lot of integrity in regards to the message of the 12 steps. I put this in for fun. It's an anti-stress kit. If all that I just mentioned doesn't work, just put this on a hard surface, follow the directions provided in the circle and repeat until you're anti-stressed or unconscious, at least go to bed. So that was a really quick spiel on addiction, definition, assessment, recovery, and relapse prevention. I hope it's been useful. Please pass this on to anybody that might benefit from it. It is MOvember, day 20, but I'm catching up here with the day 19 video. Donate to MOvember if you can for men's health, and remember, be gentle with your heart. And I will try and turn this thing off now. So take care.